everyone, this is Jen Williams doing a short recording for Super Relaxed Fantasy Club, the new fancy YouTube channel. I am the author of the Copper Cat Trilogy, which is kind of here, and the Winnowing Flame Trilogy as well, which is just sort of here, slightly outshot. I also co-founded Super Relaxed Fantasy Club with my good friend Den Patrick. So although I don't run it, or we don't run it anymore, it's kind of partially our responsibility, I suppose. So I'm very excited to see it taking on a video content direction. That's very cool. So I thought it would be nice just to say hello and hang out with you a bit today, because we're all stuck indoors, slowly going around the bend. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you what I'm reading at the moment, which might be interesting, might not, and then I will probably do a very short reading of something I'm working on, which if you've ever seen me do a reading at SRFC or anywhere else, you know that I'm not a big fan of doing readings, so I'm going to try and do a really short one, but it will be from something I'm working on at the moment rather than an old book. So maybe that's exciting, maybe that's the exciting part of it. But first of all, I hope that you're all keeping well and safe and staying indoors and keeping yourselves occupied. And it's a weird time to be alive, isn't it? But we'll get through it. We've just got to dedicate our time to things like reading a lot, playing video games, sitting around in our pants. So I think that's very, it's a heroic thing we are doing by, sitting around on our bums. So, give yourselves a pat on the back for that. So currently I am reading, first of all, there's this beast, which I suspect a lot of people are reading at the moment, which is The Mirror and the Light, by Hilary Mantel. Look at the bloody size of it. It is huge. I've taken the dust jacket off because it's just so big that it's just going to get messy. So there is the dust jacket in case you don't believe that that's why I'm reading. It's amazing, obviously. Where am I? I'm sort of 670 pages in. So we've still got it's about another 200 pages to go. And I think, things are going really well for this Thomas Cromwell bloke. I think he's going to be fine. There won't be any sort of tragic ending to it at all. I've just noticed that you can tell this is my copy of The Mirror and the Light because there's wine stains on it. That's nice, isn't it? It doesn't matter because I'll put the dust jacket back on and then it will look really pristine again and not like I'm a horrible slob. Also reading at the moment Richard Osman's Thursday Murder Club, which is a very cool crime fiction book, which I think is coming out later this year. I got a cheeky early copy of it because Richard and I share the same amazing agent, which is the brilliant Juliet Mushens. So, that's one of the many perks of having a brilliant agent, is that you occasionally get cheeky early books. But it's really funny, very readable, and he does this thing which I really like, writing about older characters, and he does a brilliant job of writing these incredibly endearing, funny older chaps that are just a joy to read, really. And they're these old people who get together and solve cold cases, which is especially good for me at the moment because I am binge watching all of the cold case files on Netflix. The other thing I'm doing. So I'm reading The Mirror and the Light in the day with lunch, and the Thursday Murder Club at night before I go to sleep. And then sometimes if I feel like I need to read something shorter, at the moment I'm reading this, which also serves as a mini plug because I have a short story in Cursed. But yeah, it's just genuinely really interesting collection of stories that I've been working my way through. I've nearly finished it actually. But a good one for if at the moment you're finding it difficult to concentrate on anything, as we, most of us are. Short stories, all a little bit weird, all a little bit creepy or strange, so that's good for dipping in and out of, I suppose. So that's my reading content. TV-wise, we've been watching Gravity Falls on Disney Plus, which is probably one of the best cartoons I've ever seen. And if you follow me on Twitter, you know that I do take cartoons very seriously. They are like my second favourite thing beneath books, but you know, not much beneath books, to be honest. I love cartoons. So we're watching Gravity Falls, which is amazing, and I've been binge watching this terrible reality TV program called Ink Master on Amazon Prime, which is lots of aggro tattoo artists competitively tattooing people, and it's bonkers because everyone is just incredibly angry on it all the time, which is great. And then video games wise, we recently got Untitled Goose Game, which was great. Obviously, I feel like a lot of people that being a horrible goose is possibly my calling in life. And we just got the Uncharted games as well, because PlayStation are doing some fancy sexy thing where you can get them for free, which I've just started that, which is also huge fun. So yeah, that is, I'd say that's 99% of how I'm spending my time at the moment. Otherwise, I have been doing some writing. Writing a horror novella at the moment, which I might be able to tell you more about at a later date. And other than that, I've been editing my thriller, which is coming out next year. So again, I can't really tell you anything about that because it's called Dog Rose Dirt. It's coming out with Harper next year, probably quite early. That's all you need to know, I suppose. So I thought I would do a reading of a fantasy book that I have been writing kind of in between everything else. And it's not contracted with anyone, so no one's asking me to write a fantasy book at the moment. I'm just doing it because I like writing fantasy. So what I will read you is the prologue. And I know, you know, prologue's very controversial in fantasy. It upsets a lot of people, so obviously I have to do a prologue and everything because I think they're great. So I'll read you that. It's not massively long, thankfully. And I'll just do a quick drink of water, actually. It's very professional, isn't it? Just drinking on the live stream. But look at the size of this bottle. It's huge. And it's really, like, tough. You could definitely kill people with it. Brilliant. Okay. So this book at the moment is called The Fox and the Fallow, but this is like its third title, so it might well be called something else eventually. And I've been thinking of it as a kind of a cross between Howl's Moving Castle and Uprooted. So it's very magic focused, I think, is the way of putting it, because I guess my previous main characters, so Widrin and Vintage, neither of them were the magic user of the group. So I thought it would be interesting to focus a fantasy novel on, you know, the squishy mage, basically. So I will do a quick read. The serpents had been screaming all day and all night for nigh on a week. With the quarters so close to the central waterway, no one in the almshouse had had any sleep, and by the time the guards came, all the children were sluggish and bleary-eyed. The girl, though, always more alert than the others, always more likely to be watching what the adults were doing, she hung back in the wide kitchen doorway, listening to the terse conversation between the bursar and the head guard. You will be compensated. Compensation? You think this is about coin? The bursar passed a hand over his bald head. What do you take us for? It's for the good of Addersport, said the guard. She was wearing heavy, shiny armour, much heavier than any worn on the general's city patrols, and the girl wondered who she was trying to impress, or threaten. The city has been under siege for days. I'm quite aware of that, thank you. And Mother Orla. At that point the guard lifted her head and seemed to see the small shadow that was the girl in the doorway. She lowered her voice. The witch mage has been very specific, and we must carry out her instructions precisely. Do you have what we need, or should I go elsewhere? Whatever you decide, it makes no difference to what must be done. Bloody magpies. Fine. Sorry, I've skipped forward slightly there because I wasn't looking where I was going. Sorry. Whatever you decide makes no difference to what must be done. The bursar sucked his teeth and looked into the fire. After a long, uncomfortable silence, the guard pulled a heavy bag from her belt and put it down on the table in front of the bursar. The bag clinked as it settled. Bloody magpies. Fine. The bag was smoothed away and the bursar stood up. Give me a few moments. The girl skittered back from the doorway, moving silently on bare feet. She didn't know what was going on, but all at once every nerve ending was singing with danger. Years later, she would wonder why she didn't just run straight out the front door and scarper, take her chances on the streets and the serpent-infested waterways. But at the time, the dusty rooms of the almshouse still seemed safe, still felt almost like home, or at least the closest thing to a home she had ever known. Upstairs was the untidy room she shared with the other bursary children. Everyone else was out collecting, but as she expected, Dunstan wasn't. He'd had a cold that he'd successfully spun into an entire week off, and he was laying sprawled on his cot. He looked up as she came in. What's got you all wild-eyed? Something's going on. She went over to his cot and sat down, then stood up again. She still felt the need to flee, but a combination of caution and curiosity was rooting her in place. She needed to tell someone else about it. There are guards here. What looks like one of the important ones, and I think she just gave money to the bursar. There are always guards here. Dunstan gave her a withering look. He was no more than a couple of months older than her, but he liked to make out he was the worldly one, always knowing slightly more than the rest of the orphans. Someone's got themselves in trouble, that's all. Or, he added, brightening up, someone's gotten themselves eaten by a serpent. Are you even listening to me? Why would the guard be giving the bursar money? Normally it's the other way round. You must have made a mistake. Dunstan attempted to turn over, putting his back to her, so she thumped him in the leg. Ow! It's nothing. Leave me alone, will you? I'm sick. Talk to me about it later. Later was too late. Later they were being led through the streets, flanked on all sides by guards bristling with weapons. 7 of them. 7 children with no parents, no families to worry about them or ask what this was all about. The girl craned her neck to see beyond the guards, and she could only catch glimpses. There were lots of people around. They were all very quiet, and they were all watching the procession. She caught sight of faces, but every time she made eye contact they looked away, as though they had just spotted something incredibly interesting across the street, or down by their boots. The girl turned around. The girl had never seen so many people on the streets during a serpent infestation. In time, they came to the place where Addersport met the sea. Here the harbour had been decked out in tattered streamers of silk, green and yellow, blue and black, and they flapped and snapped in the wind blowing off the sea. The girl turned around, trying to see the other children, but they were being kept apart by the guards. Even so, she caught Dunstan's eye, and with a sudden burst of fright, she saw that he was terrified. All his usual smug self-assurance had been wiped away, and suddenly he looked like the 8-year-old he was. Pale, thin-lipped, eyes squinted against the salt wind. That's what I look like, the girl thought. What is happening? They were led up towards the tumblestone. The girl had known the massive lump of rock that sat in Addersport Harbour all her life. It was as much a part of the world as the sea or the sky or the waterways. For the first time, she looked at it with fear. Who had put it here? Who had carved the steps into its side? There, at the foot of the rock, they were stopped and gathered together into a huddle. The guards parted, and a tall woman stepped through the gap, her red hair tossed in all directions. The screaming of the serpents seemed to grow louder. Blessed children, do you know how important you are? The woman crouched down so she could speak to them directly. She wore heavy green robes of brocade, embroidered with snarling golden lions, and her right shoulder was bare. Her face, the girl decided, was beautiful but in a cold way, and when she smiled it looked awkward, like a pretty painting hung slightly lopsided to cover a crack in the plaster. 2 of the fingers on her left hand were missing. The god mark, thought the girl. You are going to save your home today. Isn't that exciting? But you must be brave for me. Who are you? The girl shouted the question and tried to move forward. But the guard flanking her pulled her back as easily as shifting a bag of flour. Too late she realised this was probably the wrong question, and she would probably only get to ask one. But the woman with the wild red hair looked annoyed anyway. Her face shifted, her brows drawing down into a much more natural-looking scowl. Girl, I am Mother Orla the God-touched, and you will keep a civil tongue in your head while we do this important work. The witch mage. Of course it was. The girl felt another spike of panic. Orla was the chief mage of Addersport, a figure spoken of in awed whispers, her name used as an oath on the streets. She was to be found in her own lavish apartments, far from the sea and the darker waterways, yet here she was, talking to a small group of shivering orphans at the base of the tumblestone. Mother Orla stood up. On her belt of red silk there was a small leather bag, and she pressed a finger inside it. When it came out again, it was covered in a thick purple powder. Before the girl could even think to move, the witch mage had darted forward and smeared the substance across her forehead. Instantly it was harder to think, harder to move. The girl watched dumbly as the tall woman repeated the process on each of the children, until they all stood with purple marks on their heads. Children of no one, Orla straightened up again, the forced smile back on her face. Today you do your home a great service. You will save many lives. In Addersport hereafter you will be heroes. Now, ascend the tumblestone. This is not our home. Each word was like a rock being pushed between the girl's lips. We don't have one. The witch mage spared her one glance, and then the guards were pushing them forwards again, up the steps that cut through the back of the enormous stone. There were 2 boys in front of the girl, and the guards obscured her view of the sea. The stone underneath her scuffed sandals was hot and blasted with salt, making it look mottled and strange, like the skin of an old giant. When she reached the top, somehow Orla was there already, and she stood just before the 2 boys who went before her. All around them the sea was heaving and crashing, and the screaming of the serpents was so loud it almost drowned out the words of the witch mage, whose face was turned up to the sky as she entreated her patron god to give her power. She was shouting at the top of her lungs, spittle flying from her lips, and then she turned and pushed the nearest boy off the edge of the tumblestone. The girl jumped with fright. The children around her began to scream. She turned on the witch mage. What are you doing? Why did you do that? Mother Orla wasn't even looking at her. She was in the midst of her prayer, and her eyes were wild. The girl shrank back, wondering if the god was there among them, if it had come down to listen and was now curled all around them, invisible. More shouting, and the woman grabbed another child and threw him down into the sea. This time the girl caught his ragged scream, cut off as he hit the water. Let us go. No one was listening. The girl felt a small hand grab at her arm and turned to see Dunstan standing with her. His face had gone a chalky, almost yellow colour, and the hand that clutched at her was as cold as ice. They're feeding us to them. Despite the noise, she heard every word. To the serpents. The witch mage swooped down on them, and although the girl tried to hold on to him, Dunstan was carried to the edge. Mother Orla's fist bunched in his cheap, stained shirt. He didn't struggle, and the girl saw his eyes roll up into his head as he went over the side. The witch was still muttering prayer words to her god, and the girl was almost sure she could sense the current of power swirling around them. What use is that? She thought furiously. What's the point in finding out what I am now? Then it was her turn. Whatever the purple smudge of clay on her forehead had done, it couldn't keep her still entirely. and in the end 2 of the guards had to assist Mother Orla in dragging her to the edge of the tumblestone. The place where the rock ended was a lethal, empty space, and below it the sea had been replaced by a churning maelstrom of long, scaled bodies and glinting, hook-shaped teeth. She could see, as much as she didn't want to, pieces of her fellow bursary children, a small brown hand still attached to a ragged forearm, a blood-stained trouser leg. Like Dunstan, the girl felt her grip on the world grow slippery, the edge of her vision turning dark. "No," she said, "you can't do this." Mother Orla paused in her chanting and crouched down to bring her lips level with the girl's ear. Her breath was hot, feverish. "I see what you are, little witch," she said. "What an unexpected treat for my god and for the serpents." And the witch mage threw her from the rock into the waiting mouths below. The stone beneath her feet was gone. There was an awful yawning sense of nothing, and then she struck a mass of hard, cold bodies. For a handful of seconds it was as though the sea itself had vanished. She had fallen instead into a country made of serpents, a solid land of hissing and scales like battered silver coins. The girl saw her sandal come off, saw blood in the water, and then a pain like nothing she'd ever imagined seized around her midriff. A huge yellow sea serpent had its jaws around her, sinking its barbed teeth into her flesh. There was no breath or room to scream. Another moment and she was tugged down under the black sea water and the writhing bodies, the dappled light of the sun speeding away from her, the human world left far behind. "I'm dead," she thought. And then something else began to flow into her veins, something cold and dark that ate up her own red blood and replaced it with poison. The girl's eyelids fluttered once or twice, a strange hiccuping tremor that moved through her whole body. When she opened her eyes again, the inner life of the sea was revealed in a flickering corona of colours. Welcome home, poison child," said the serpent. That's the end of the prologue. You can tell it's really new because I keep cocking it up. So genuinely no one else has read that, or I've certainly never read it before either. So apologies for the repeated cock-ups in the reading, which I obviously can't be asked to edit out of this because I don't even know how to do that. So, so that's the beginning of the book that I'm sort of working on in between everything else. One day I'll start a fantasy book without sacrificing a child, but not today, obviously. Thanks for watching, and thank you to SRFC for setting up the YouTube channel. It's lovely to see everyone's faces, and I hope that you are all keeping well and safe, and hopefully we'll all get to see each other again soon, hopefully down the pub. So take care.